The sand was cruel that morning. Not just hot, not just sharp, but cruel, the kind that whispered ancient things as it scoured flesh and soul alike. A wind blew over the canyon lip and swept down across the basin where a girl, no older than 14, dragged her feet through the dust. Her ankles bled where the rope bit into them, rubbed raw by hours of walking barefoot under the sun's unflinching eye. Behind her trailed a smear of blood, barely visible against the ochre earth. Ahead, the boy leading the camel did not look back. He held the rope in one hand, slack enough that she could follow, taut enough to remind her of her place. He was lean, sunburnt, perhaps 17, with skin like scorched bark and a face that seemed to resent the burden behind him. His lips moved now and then, not in song or speech, but chewing something bitter from a pouch at his waist. She didn't know his name. He'd never asked for hers. They had crossed 2 dry rivers since dawn. The bones of dead cattle lined the banks. Buzzards circled in distant spirals. Somewhere far off, a coyote's cry pierced the silence, but it sounded more like laughter than warning. She kept walking. Her dress, once the pale yellow of wildflowers, had faded to the color of old paper. Torn in places, crusted with blood and dust, it barely clung to her shoulders. Her hair, thick and tangled, stuck to the sweat on her neck. One eye was bruised. Her lips were split. But she made no sound. Silence was safer. The rope had been around her wrist since the boy bought her. Or bartered, really. A mule, some bullets, and a flask of bitter whiskey. Her step-uncle had laughed when the trade was made, told the boy she'd make a decent cook if beaten often enough. She hadn't spoken since. Not when they tied her hands. Not when they forced her onto the trail. Not when the boy tugged her like a pack mule behind his camel. The world, she understood, did not care for the tears of girls like her. At midday, the sun reached its cruelest point. The camel stopped to rest near a jagged outcrop of rock. The boy crouched in the shade it offered, drinking water from a dented flask. She stood where the rope allowed, back arched, knees trembling. He didn't offer her a drink. She licked her lips and tasted only salt. A pebble pressed into the wound on her heel. Her stomach ached. Her head floated somewhere above her body, like a hawk watching itself suffer. A gust of wind lifted her hair. She looked up. For just a breath, just a blink, she thought she saw something on the ridge above. A rider. Still as a statue. Watching. But when she blinked again, there was only sky. The boy pulled the rope. She staggered forward. The camel moaned and resumed its march. The blood on her feet grew darker, dried quicker. She began counting her steps and whisper, not numbers, but names. Mama. Papa. My brother. My sister. Mama. 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 She thought of her mother's voice, soft and syrupy, combing her hair by lantern light. A song she used to hum came back in pieces, like old paper caught in wind. You're not meant for sorrow. You're meant for the sky. But some birds get broken before they can fly. She bit her lip until it bled. The tears came hot, furious, unwanted. She hated them. Hated their weakness. Hated that the boy might turn and see. But he never did. Hours passed. The world turned orange and low. Shadows stretched like claws across the canyon floor. Her feet slipped on loose stones. Her knees gave out once, twice. Each time the rope yanked her back up. Her arms burned. Her mouth was so dry it hurt to breathe. The third time she fell, she didn't rise. The boy cursed, spat into the sand, and stomped back toward her. He grabbed the rope and jerked it hard. Her body shifted but didn't move. He kicked dust at her, then leaned down, gripped her arm, and tried to pull her to her feet. Her legs buckled. She collapsed again, face first into a thorn bush. A sharp cry escaped her lips, the first sound she'd made in days. Her cheeks split open. Blood mixed with grit. The boy growled and slapped her hard across the shoulder, once, twice. She curled inward like a dying flower. Get up, he muttered. Don't make me drag you like a dog. He stepped back, waiting. She didn't move. Then he did something strange. He looked around. Not in frustration. Not in anger. In fear. Because from somewhere high on the ridge, the sound of hooves echoed against the stone. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. The boy dropped the rope. Stared into the growing dusk. The camel groaned. She, lying among thorns, lifted her eyes. Blood blurred her vision. The wind picked up. A figure, yes, there was one now, no imagining this time, stood silhouetted against the dying sun. Tall. Still. Watching. The boy spat again, but it lacked confidence now. He yanked the rope once more, harder, and dragged her several feet before stopping. She gasped. The pain was fire. Her body trembled. But something in her stirred too. Not defiance. Not yet. But awareness. Of being seen. Not pitied. Not saved. Seen. The figure on the ridge didn't move. After a moment, he turned his horse and disappeared beyond the line of the canyon. No words. No gunshots. No heroism. Just quiet departure. The girl didn't know why that made her cry harder than anything else. The boy hauled her to her feet, swearing the whole time. He shoved her forward, and she staggered, half walking, half falling, until the faint glow of lanterns shimmered ahead. A town. Tiny, forgotten, leaning into the wind. A crooked sign swung on rusted chains. She barely registered it. Just one last fall, just before the wooden fence began, when her knees gave out and she hit the ground once more. But this time, the boy didn't curse. Didn't hit. Because standing just beyond the fence, saddlebag in hand, was the man from the ridge. Close now. Real now. He said nothing. Just watched. The boy shifted uneasily. Tugged the rope again. And again, the girl didn't rise. The man tilted his head slightly, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. For the first time, the boy looked like a child. He dropped the rope. Turned. And walked away. The camel followed. No words. No fight. Just wind. Just dust. The girl, shaking, stared at the man whose presence had undone chains without a blade. Her vision faded. Her last thought before sleep took her was simple. Not a prayer. Not a memory. Just one word, pulsing like a heartbeat. Safe. The morning broke brittle and thin over the town, a scattering of crooked buildings hunched like old bones under a pale sky. The sign above the trading post swung lazily in the wind, its letters faded, its promise worn. Dry Creek Mercantile and Goods. Horses nickered from the hitch rail. A dog barked once and fell quiet again. Dust curled around everything like it had settled centuries ago and never left. She woke on the edge of that stillness. Her cheek was crusted with dried blood. Her wrists bore the memory of the rope, though it was gone. When she moved, her body protested in 100 whispered aches. But she was not in the sand anymore. Wooden planks beneath her. A wall at her back. The post's outer porch, shaded by an awning that creaked with the wind. She sat up slowly, legs trembling, and blinked against the pale light. No one noticed her. Or they pretended not to. Men with sun-blackened necks leaned on the railing, spitting tobacco. A woman in a patched green dress swept dust from inside the saloon. Life went on. This was not a place where girls like her mattered. They came and went like wind-borne leaves, light, torn, forgettable. Until a voice said, low and sure, "You'll want to stand when he comes." She turned her head. An older man sat on a barrel beside the door, his beard white as river foam. His hat shaded most of his face, but his mouth was visible, thin-lipped, dry, serious. He didn't look at her when he spoke. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He didn't seem to expect one. "Mr. Halder runs this town square," he continued. "Owns the church, the well, the saloon's name. He'll be the one buying you today." The girl's heart beat slow and loud in her chest. She looked down at her hands, still dirty, knotted with dried blood and sand. Her voice returned in a whisper. "I'm not for sale. The man on the barrel didn't laugh. Just lifted his canteen and took a small drink. Girl, everything's for sale out here. Even mercy. And then he nodded once, toward the open road. Mr. Halder arrived on a black gelding, his silhouette long and lean in the sun. He wore a long coat like a preacher's and a hat that cast shadows over his eyes. His boots were polished. His silver tooth gleamed when he smiled. He dismounted slowly, handing the reins to no one in particular. His presence was not loud, it was quiet, controlled like a held breath. He stepped up onto the post's wooden walk and looked at the girl like she was a task to be solved, not a person. The trader boy was already there, having returned some time before dawn. He stood smug, arms crossed, like he was presenting fine livestock. She's still healthy, he said. Bit dusty. But she's young. Halder said nothing at first. He knelt, grasped the girl's chin, tilted her face toward the light. She flinched but did not pull away. His eyes were pale and cold. His touch was clean and careful, the way one handles something delicate, not precious. She speak. She don't need to, the boy said. She works, obeys, keeps quiet. Halder rose, looked down at her once more, then turned to the boy. $15. A blanket and boot. Final. The boy agreed without blinking. He had no love for the girl, just a trade fulfilled. The girl said nothing as they shook hands. When Halder motioned for her to follow, she stood. Her legs wobbled but held. He did not bind her, no need. His control was deeper than rope. It came from the understanding that no one would stop him. Inside the back of the church, though it hadn't held a sermon in years, Halder kept his house. Sparse, dark, clean. A cot in the corner. A stove with ashes still warm. A narrow window that looked out over the dry hills. This is where you'll sleep, he said. You clean what I tell you. Wash my linens on Sunday. Fetch my supper from the saloon. You do it quiet. I do not tolerate insolence. She nodded, mute. The days passed. She did as he said. Never spoke. Washed dishes with a cracked bar of soap. Hauled water from the well in a wooden bucket that bruised her thighs with every step. Scrubbed floors until her hands peeled. Halder rarely raised his voice. But when he did, it stung more than any hand. His words were sharp-edged and final. He spoke of God often, but not the way a preacher might. He spoke of sin and obedience, of women's weakness and men's burden. His silver tooth flashed whenever he smiled at his own righteousness. She didn't resist. Not yet. Not even when he watched her too long across dinner. Or when he stood just inside the door as she swept the front porch at dusk. Because she knew. The world punished girls who made noise. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters and dust hissed across the windows, she was sent to the saloon for his supper. She waited at the counter while the cook scraped a plate clean. Men stared. One whistled low. She kept her eyes down. Then someone stepped beside her. Boot. Quiet. Dust-stained. She looked up and saw him, the man from the ridge. He stood beside her like a shadow taller than his own. His clothes were plain, saddle-worn and sun-bleached. His hat was wide, pulled low. His eyes, when they met hers, were pale blue and unflinching. He said nothing. She stared for a long moment. Still nothing. But his silence felt different than Halder's. It held no threat, no hunger, just recognition. She took the plate, walked away. But something followed her back through the wind that night. Not footsteps, not words, presence. The next day she saw him again. Across the street, sitting outside a saddle shop. He was carving something with a knife. Didn't glance up when she passed. Halder didn't seem to notice him. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Why would he? Who could stop him? 2 nights later, she found something on the church step. A small tin cup of water. And beside it, half a biscuit wrapped in cloth. No note. She looked up at the hills. The saddle shop was dark. No figure in the window. She knelt, drank, ate in silence. Her hands trembled. not from fear. From the memory of gentleness. It was almost worse than cruelty, because it reminded her what the world had taken. A week passed, then 2, and the gifts continued. A clean rag for her bruises, a comb, a tiny wooden horse, rough-carved, its legs uneven, always left without witness, until one morning, while hauling water, she looked up to see him standing by the trough. He handed her a folded shawl, soft, faded blue. Her fingers touched it like it might vanish. "You'll freeze come winter," he said. The first words he ever spoke to her. She tried to reply. No sound came. Only tears. He didn't touch her. Didn't pity her. He just nodded once and walked away. And for the first time in many seasons, she wept not from pain, but from the strange ache of being seen. The frost came in the night like a whisper, thin, biting, and cruel. By dawn, a thin veil of white coated the wooden porch where she had collapsed the evening before. Her shawl was damp with cold, her fingers curled tightly into fists, as though trying to remember warmth. Her breath, shallow and pale, left brief ghosts in the air. Mr. Halder stepped over her as he left for his morning ride. No pause. No word. By mid-morning she still hadn't moved. Her limbs refused. Her skin ached with fever. The world around her tilted slightly, as though something inside her had come loose. That was when she noticed the cup, set neatly by the post. A second one beside it, still steaming. And beside both, a tin bowl with warm oats, a pinch of dried berries on top like an offering. She lifted herself inch by inch, sat against the wooden beam, and reached for the food. Her hands shook too hard to hold the spoon steady. She drank instead, mouth against the rim, trembling, grateful. When she looked up, across the street, he was there again. Sitting beneath the overhang of his shop, carving wood like he always did. The quiet man. Elias. He didn't watch her. He never stared. But somehow, she felt his attention all the same. Not heavy. Not pressing. Just present. That night, the fever broke. She managed to sweep the floors and bring Halder his supper. He didn't speak of the morning. Didn't ask why she hadn't done her chores. He just stared at her longer than usual, lips pursed, silver tooth catching the lamplight. Something shifted in her. The next day, Elias stepped out from his shop as she passed. He held something in his hand, a smooth, round jar. No label. No questions. He offered it to her with a nod. "For your hands?" he said. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but something passed between them anyway, an understanding, or maybe just a quiet kind of trust. The ointment smelled like pine and clean earth. She applied it in secret, and the cracked skin along her knuckles began to heal. She didn't thank him aloud. But when she passed again 2 days later, she left a small carved pebble near his doorstep. It was shaped like a heart. Lopsided. Unpolished. She had made it with a butter knife when no one was looking. Elias found it. Didn't mention it. But she saw the way he tucked it into his pocket without a word. Over the next week, their exchanges remained wordless, brief glances, quiet gestures. She began to carry herself straighter, her eyes lifting a little higher. She swept faster, walked steadier. The bruises faded, and though her past still wrapped tight around her ribs, it began to loosen, just a little, with every sunrise. And then one afternoon, Elias stepped out from his shop while she passed with the laundry basket. "You ever ride?" he asked. She stopped. Blinked. His voice was always steady, never loud, never uncertain. She shook her head slowly. He nodded once. "Tomorrow. I'll teach you. If you want." The wind caught her shawl. She didn't answer aloud, but the way she held his gaze a moment longer than before was answer enough. When the morning came, she crept out early, before Halder stirred. The saddle shop smelled like leather and oil and cedarwood. Elias stood beside a quiet mare, reins in hand. Her name was Juniper. Soft eyes, gentle steps. Elias helped her into the saddle, careful, slow. No pressure. No sudden movements. She trembled at first, but he steadied her with his voice. Let her feel your weight. Don't fight her. Just listen. It wasn't just about the horse. He walked beside her as she circled the pen. At first, she held the horn like a lifeline. Then her grip softened. Then she let go. Afterward, he didn't praise her. He didn't need to. He just looked at her like she had done something sacred. She smiled. A real one. Small. Quick. But true. That evening, Halder noticed the difference. You've been smiling, he muttered. Looks unnatural on a girl like you. She said nothing. Kept her eyes low. But inside, the warmth from the ride still lingered. She felt it in her spine, in the place where fear once lived. The next week passed in a rhythm not of joy, but of peace. A fragile sort, like a bird resting on a fence post during storm season. It could fly away any moment. But for now it stayed. She learned to polish saddle leather. She learned to braid rope. Elias showed her how to whittle, how to read the clouds, how to find water by the shape of the land. He never asked about her past. She never asked about his. But she saw it in the way he stood too long before the unlit fireplace. The way he touched the corner of the dining table as he passed. The framed sketch on the wall, of a woman with a gentle smile, holding a child that never grew older. He had known loss. Not in a distant way. In the kind that shapes silence. One morning, while cleaning the back porch, she cut her palm on a rusty nail. The blood came fast and sudden. She hissed, dropped the pail. Halder saw from the steps. He scowled. You bleed too easy, he muttered. He went inside without offering a rag. But later, at the edge of dusk, Elias wrapped her hand in clean cloth and rubbed salve over the cut. His fingers were rough, but his touch was patient. He didn't scold her. Didn't flinch when she winced. You ought not be doing all that alone, he said softly. She looked down. The cloth was warm. His hands lingered a moment longer than before. He let go. The rope around her heart, one no one could see, the one knotted by shame and pain and silence, pulled taut. And then it began to slip. One knot. Then another. A week later, Elias spoke to Halder. No one heard what was said. No voices raised. Just two men in the shade of the mercantile, one steady and one sneering. By sundown, Halder tossed her shawl at her feet and muttered, You're his problem now. He didn't ask for money. Didn't sign a paper. He just walked away. She picked up the shawl. Stood for a long time on the edge of the street, not knowing where to go. Elias stood in his doorway, quiet as always. You've got a place, he said. And she walked toward it. The rope around her wrist was still there, frayed, dirty. He reached out, took a knife from his belt, and cut it clean through. The rope fell to the ground between them. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she looked up. And for the first time in a long, long while, she felt the air in her lungs as hers. The house smelled like cedar shavings and saddle oil. No lace curtains, no embroidered pillows, no pictures of saints on the walls. Just bare wood, the steady tick of a brass clock, and quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel hollow, but restful, like it had been chosen rather than forced. Her room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a soft quilt faded from years of washing, and a window that looked out toward the ridgeline where the hawks circled. The first night she slept with one hand curled around her shawl, the other resting lightly over her ribs. Her breath never fully deepened, but it didn't tremble either. Elias never entered without knocking. He made that clear from the start. You've got your space, he said, standing at the doorframe, not crossing it. That don't change. He didn't ask questions. Not about the bruises. Not about her silence. Not even about her name. He called her Miss for days, until she whispered it one morning while folding linens beside the stove. He didn't say it back right away. Just nodded, as though he'd been waiting for her to trust herself with it first. Breakfast was quiet. Supper quieter. But in between, the silence softened, loosened. She swept the porch, polished bridles, learned the way leather sang under careful hands. He taught her how to oil hinges, how to read the clouds for coming frost, how to wrap a sprained ankle. He never raised his voice. Never hovered too close. When he showed her how to trim a hoof, he let her hold the rasp with both hands, only correcting her once, gently. When she flinched at the sudden bray of a mule, he didn't mock the reaction. He just offered a small apple slice and waited for her to return to the task. Day by day, her breath began to sit deeper in her chest. At night, she would sit near the hearth with a book she couldn't fully read, tracing the shapes of letters with her fingertip, mouthing the words until they began to hold meaning again. Elias would carve beside her, small animals, sometimes buttons, once a bird that he gave her without comment. She kept it beside her pillow. He never asked what she was reading. He never corrected her when she stumbled through a word aloud. That was the rhythm of it. No force. No demand. Just time. And patience. One Sunday, when the wind blew soft, and the air carried the scent of sagebrush in bloom, she braided her hair before stepping outside. Elias looked up from the watering trough and paused, not long, just long enough for her to notice the softening in his eyes. "You look peaceful today," he said. She didn't answer. But her hands didn't shake as she gripped the feed bucket. They shared little moments like that. Quiet ones, easy to miss. A cup of tea he left beside her sewing basket. A pair of gloves she patched when his had torn. A glance held a moment too long when the fire cracked and neither moved to stir it. They never called it anything. But it lived between them. A thread that neither pulled nor cut. Miss Inez from the saloon began stopping by in the afternoons with stories from town. She brought a blue ribbon once and tied it in the girl's hair with a wink. "Got softness in your face now," she said. "Didn't have that when you got here." The girl didn't know what to say to that. But she wore the ribbon anyway. Little Tommy, who'd lost a leg to fever and now hobbled with a carved stick, brought her a pebble he'd polished until it shone like river glass. She gave him one of Elias's wooden foxes in return. The town didn't speak of her past. They didn't need to. Her presence, steady, quiet, blooming, was answer enough. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the canyon, Elias invited her to ride with him to the northern ridge. She hesitated, then nodded. Juniper waited with 2 saddles. They rode in silence at first, the wind rustling the dry grass. Coyotes barked in the distance. Crickets began their slow serenade. At the top, he dismounted and stood beside a crooked pine. "This is where I used to come," he said softly. "Back when I still thought talking to the wind might bring her back." She said nothing. Just watched him. "My wife," he added. "She died birthing our first." "They both did." He looked out across the valley, not at her. "I stopped speaking much after that. Didn't see the point." The girl's breath caught in her throat. Not from fear. From understanding. He turned then, slowly. "But you remind me that silence isn't always emptiness. Sometimes it's just waiting to be filled with the right thing." Her eyes stung. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not since she'd come to this place. But the tears came anyway, soft and silent, and she didn't hide them. He didn't step forward. Didn't reach for her. Just stood steady, his presence like a pillar beside her. And that steadiness, that patience, was everything. On the ride back, they didn't speak. Didn't need to. The wind carried something unspoken between them, gentle and sure. That night, she wrote her name in the dirt beside the well. Just 3 letters scratched with a stick. He saw it in the morning. Didn't say a word. But that evening, when she returned from feeding the chickens, she found a small wooden plaque nailed to the inside of her room. Her name, carved carefully, letter by letter. It was crooked. A little too shallow on one side. But it was hers. The past had not vanished. She still woke sometimes to the echo of rope against skin. Still flinched when thunder rolled too suddenly. But each day, the memory hurt a little less. Each day, the present grew a little louder. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew this. Kindness was not weakness. Quiet was not absence. And love, the real kind, grew slow. Like desert flowers in spring. It didn't arrive in storms. It arrived in soft footsteps, shared tea, calloused hands, and blue ribbons. And in the presence of a man who saw her not as broken, but as brave. A girl who had once been dragged through sand now stood tall beside a warm hearth, a wooden bird by her bed, her name carved in oak. And somewhere deep inside, where no rope could ever reach again, something had bloomed. The wind shifted that morning. Not hard, not loud, just enough to make the chickens restless and the horses stomp. Elias paused in the middle of oiling a saddle and glanced up, eyes narrowing toward the road that twisted down from the ridgeline. He felt it in his spine first. Then in his gut. Something was coming. The girl was outside, collecting eggs in her shawl. The sun caught her hair and made it look gold. She smiled faintly when she saw Elias, and he returned it without words. They had grown used to not speaking much. Their comfort lived in the silence between sentences. The rhythm of trust didn't always need a beat. By mid-morning, the dust cloud on the trail became a rider. One. Fast. Confident. The kind of speed only a man uses when he thinks the world owes him. The girl noticed the sound first. Her fingers froze over the last egg. Then, slowly, she straightened and stepped back into the shadow of the coop. Her breath caught just once. Elias heard it. He stood beside her a moment later, not touching, just near enough that she didn't have to hold the air alone. The horse came into view, black as dried pitch, nostrils flared. And astride it, Mr. Halder. Silver tooth flashing like a blade in the sun. His coat had changed, but not the man. Still the same posture, straight-backed and calculating. He pulled up just short of the gate, and dismounted like he still owned the dirt beneath his boots. Elias said nothing. Halder's eyes swept the yard, then landed on the girl. "Well," he said, voice slick, "I see you've healed up nicely. No surprise. Young ones bounce back fast." She didn't flinch. Didn't move. But her hand curled around the shawl at her waist like a tether. Elias stepped forward now, slow, calm. "You're not welcome here." Halder smiled, the flash of silver catching again. "Law might say different. I never signed her over proper. She was lent to you. Out of convenience. I've come to collect." The girl's throat tightened. She couldn't move her feet. "She's not property," Elias replied. "And even if she were, there's no debt between us. I gave you coin. More than she ever owed you." Halder scoffed. "You call that payment? A few dollars and a favor? I raised her, fed her, gave her purpose. She wasn't yours to give," Elias said. A pause. Tense. Quiet. The girl stepped forward then. Just a few feet, just enough to stand beside Elias, not behind him. Her voice, though soft, carried. "I belong to no one." It landed like a stone in a still pond. Halder's smile faded. "You think living with a sad man in a dusty shop changes that?" His voice hardened. "You forget what you came from? What I kept you from. You were nothing. You were dirt when I found you. I was always more than you saw," she said, steady now. "You just didn't know how to look." Something shifted in her. The girl who once walked barefoot and bleeding now stood in worn boots and a clean dress. Still bruised in memory, but not in soul. Halder's jaw tensed. He stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You always were a mouthy little." Elias moved without raising his voice. "Don't." Halder paused. "I'm within my right." "No," Elias said. "You're not." Halder reached into his coat, fingers brushing metal. And in that instant, the girl's breath vanished. But Elias didn't flinch. He didn't draw. He stepped between her and Halder and locked eyes with the man. "You want to settle something, do it with me. You come near her again, I won't use words next time." Halder hesitated. The town had grown quiet. From the edge of the saloon, Miss Inez stepped out, arms folded. A few ranch hands gathered by the well. Even Tommy stood from behind a crate, wooden crutch firm beneath him. One by one, faces turned toward Halder. Watching. Not with fear. But resolve. The kind that said, not here. Not again, Halder's sneer curled slowly into something uglier. This town used to know its place, he muttered. And now it knows its people, Elias said. Halder spat into the dirt. He looked at the girl one last time, but it was not the look of a man reclaiming something. It was the look of a man who knew he had already lost. Keep your prize, he said. But don't think this makes her clean. That kind of dirt don't wash off. He mounted his horse and turned without another word. This time, no one stopped him. No one chased him either. He rode out slow, head high. But the wind didn't respect him. It kicked dust into his eyes as he disappeared over the ridge. The silence afterward was long. Then Miss Inez called from across the street. You all right, honey? The girl nodded, only barely. Elias turned to her. His voice was soft. You all right? She tried to answer. Couldn't. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from release. She had braced herself to be taken, to be bound, to be thrown back into that silent, cold world. And it hadn't happened. Because this time, someone stood. Because she had stood. She stepped forward and picked up the rope Halder had dropped as he'd reached for his pistol. It lay coiled in the dust, frayed at the end. She held it for a long moment, then walked it over to the fire pit beside the shop and tossed it in. The flames caught quickly. The rope twisted, hissed, and turned black. Elias watched from a few steps away. She spoke quietly. That was the last of it. He nodded. That's right. Later that night, they sat beneath the porch as stars blinked into the velvet sky. The wind had calmed. The world felt wider somehow, but also more still. She sipped tea from the cup he'd warmed for her. Then she set it down and looked at him. Why did you help me? She asked. He didn't look surprised by the question. He rubbed the rim of his cup, then said, Because I saw someone worth saving. Not because she was weak, but because she was stronger than she believed. She blinked slowly, then leaned her head against his shoulder. Not a grand gesture. Not a confession. Just rest. The kind only earned through surviving. Above them, the stars didn't speak. But they listened. And the rope, the one that had followed her for too long, lived in her chest even after it had been cut, was gone now. Burned, buried in flame and ash. She would never forget what had been done to her. But she no longer lived inside it. And in the warm, dust-swept quiet of a town that once looked the other way, a girl who once bled through the sand now breathed deep. And knew she was free.